and gentlemen, and welcome back to SF Live. I'm your host, Myrna Lim. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. So we're in 2012, and if you would recall, in 2008 there was a major upheaval in the US and global economy. At that time, we made a tape. We made an interview of our current host, Brian Browne, on Economist, to explain to us what is going on with the world today, to give us an insight as to why millions and millions of people are losing their jobs or losing their homes. And we want that kind of explanation from a professional, an economist, so we can connect the dots in our own minds. Well, 3 years later, or 4 years later, since it's 2012, we would like to visit that economy. There has been stimulus packages. There has been the TARP. We've had bailouts. We had a new president who promised hope and change. And now it's again a presidential election. The question is, are we better off today than we were when this major upheaval happened? So for that purpose, we're revisiting with the economist Brian Browne. Hi Brian, how are you?
Well, thank you, Myrna. Thank you for inviting me back, and likewise, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you.
It's a pleasure. So now we're revisiting the economy, and everybody is asking, okay, for a lot of people, their conditions have not changed.
Right.
For a lot of people, we're looking at our politicians, we're looking at our leaders and saying, hey, you promised hope and change. And now here we are, we have a presidential election, and there's a new guy trying to be the new sheriff in town saying, well, the change didn't happen, it got worse because of so-and-so. Well, people like us are a little bit confused, to say the least. So hopefully you can give us a picture as to what an economist really think is going on. So we have your forecast for 2012, right, Brian?
Well, I have no special crystal ball, but I did put down some thoughts, and I gave you copies of them.
Okay, great.
And maybe I could go through them.
Well, let's go moving.
Well, the first thing an economist believes that trade, exchange, and production, unhindered, will continue among people, and that what creates these blips, which we call either recessions or depressions or great recessions, and it's usually some sort of outside intervention, and that usually comes from the government. And certainly that's the culprit in this case, along with a lot of trade as malcreants that sort of got out of control. But
okay, here's Ryan's forecast in paper. Yeah. I hope the audience can see this, okay?
Well, I covered the first point, and I say cycles are not inevitable in where my belief system. I believe that you can have certain errors, but they can correct fairly quickly. But major cycles occur, business cycles occur because of the government, and because of the incredible deregulation, which we spoke about, the fast, the shenanigans that went on. We'll get into that later if we have time. And so now, where are we at, and what are we looking for 2002?
Okay.
And
2012,
rather. Thank you. Well, I think that we'll have a continuation of possibly small gains in employment and small gains in the real gross GNP. And this will continue, but I believe a lot of structural unemployment will remain. And by structural unemployment, I mean a lot of people who have skills will no longer find a market for their skills.
Okay, that's kind of depressing, all right?
It is depressing, yes. It is depressing, and you see on television whole towns where people, middle-class people, are now slid below the poverty line because the value of what they have to offer has fallen, and the demand for it that does not generate incomes for them. And so it depends where you are in the life cycle, how you can adjust to that, and that's more sociological than economics. But we are seeing that.
Okay.
And there are a lot of reasons for that, of course. Outsourcing of jobs, trade policies, wars, monetarization of the debt, and so forth. That is basically my core forecast.
Well, so what difference? What would a new president or a re-elected president do then? What difference would it make for the average person?
Well, I don't think any new president can go back and
Redo?
put Glass-Steagall back in place and all the rules and regulations that were dismantled.
Right.
By starting with
in year 2000 by
Ronald Reagan when he merged the banking system, functions of the banks, and then
wasn't that 2000 with Bill Clinton at that time?
No, Bill Clinton passed the Commodities Modernization Act, which made bucket shops. In other words, betting on everything.
Right.
Credit default swaps legalized. Right. We talked about that at great length.
Right.
And we don't know how that leaked into the money supply, that type of betting, but it was, so many people went belly up because they were like insurance policies, but they weren't really insurance policies. They weren't backed by any government agency.
Right.
They were highly speculative, but they were betting on very important issues. But they were no different to betting on horses or the race.
So basically you're saying, all right, there's a major infrastructure problem with the economy, and no president can fix that because they were in place by previous Congresses, where regulations were changed or deregulations of the finance industry happened. I remember a long time ago, not to divulge my age, but I used to work for banks when banks were banks. That's the good old mom and pop bank. You put your deposit and it's safe. And there's the Bank of America, Sumitomo Bank, and Bank of California. And that's before investment bankers and real estate brokerage companies merged with banks.
Right.
So when that happened, when that merger happened with Wall Street investment bankers and commercial real estate, it's like putting the fox in the hen house.
Yeah.
Suddenly the banks are no longer the banks. You have a new, different animal. But to effect that, Congress had to enact new legislations. You're talking about the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act?
Well, it was repealed. I don't think that they can put it back in place.
Right.
They have a new bureau, a credit oversight type bureau.
Right.
I have very little confidence in these type oversight bureaus being part of one here in the city.
Right.
Because basically it might be better not to have them than to have them. But
sure, a lot of them.
I think that I think it's a great economy, the U.S., and it's got.
Well, I think it's solid. I truly want to believe so because you came from Australia, right? And you came to America, and I came from the Philippines, a very poor country. My dad brought us here, so we're like, hoping and for that good old American dream, and hopefully the next generation will be better and better. But what we're seeing is that this new generation is it's tough. It's going to be really tough for them.
Well, I think that the deregulation of the financial markets and the letting of subsidizing by the taxpayers like you and me and everyone else, like with TARP, and then the trillions of dollars that we don't know what the Fed is doing with.
Or what they did with it.
Or what they might even still be doing, and what the market innovate. I think that's caused such disruptions, is what I spoke about, that it's created great uncertainty.
Right.
And then we've had all the NAFTA and other trade agreements.
Right.
And everything happened so fast that I think that the pace was too quick, and it had a tremendous impact, and you see it.
Right.
And then we are fighting wars we can't afford. We have bases in lots of countries which we can't afford. I think that it's time for us to cut back and live within our budget.
Well, let's talk about the global change, because really, when all of these changes occurred in America, I mean, we are part of a global economy. And I'm curious because, there's this quote Occupy movement, the 1% and the 99%. But when we speak of the 1%, we're not talking about the good old Americans 1%, the good old American billionaires. We're talking about the top 1% of the world. You're talking about the Saudi royalty, the royalty from Brunei, the wealthiest people from Asia, from China, who holds majority of our notes, treasury notes. So when you have that shift in class, economic classes, and change, you're talking about a global change, correct? And that's why the outsourcing of jobs is a big issue for when you say that the jobs will not come back and a lot of the people who are unemployed will regain employment. That is a pretty sad kind of projection.
Well, you made a very good point. I mean, a lot of these changes in the economy were inevitable by the merging of the various world economies.
Right.
There's no doubt in my mind.
Right.
A lot of that happened. But there were a lot of things the government could have done differently. I think, one, they didn't have to bail out these people who had made a fortune
Right.
with these very dodgy type financial instruments.
Right.
They should have let them fail. And that's how markets work.
Right.
I do not believe we would have had a worse situation. That money might have been diverted into helping the middle class people in the transition if we were
Right.
going to do a top and give it to those type people for re-education, retraining, and so forth and so on. But to give it to these type financial institutions didn't make any sense.
Well, there was the
to me.
stimulus funds in itself as well, right? Remember the
Yeah,
$780 billion stimulus funds?
Yeah, but then we went into great debt for it, and we've lived beyond our means for so long.
Well, still a question is what happened to all those monies, though, right? The stimulus funds?
Well, that's just how it was spent, where it was spent. I don't know. I mean,
Exactly.
I'm not big for. I mean, I'm for that type of investment. I think that there was a gentleman during the recession. We talked about this, the Great Depression,
Right.
who approached Roosevelt and said, "Why not give all the seniors, I think it was over 55 at that time, $300 or something." I'm trying to think of the name of the guy's plan, and give it to them. They must spend it in the month.
Exactly.
And
Well,
Roosevelt held it.
The funny thing is, with the federal government spending trillions and trillions of dollars with this TARP and the stimulus bill, if they have given each unemployed American like $50,000 each, they would have spent it, which meant that they would be buying things, which meant that retail shops will be doing okay, which means that there's a market demand, which means that manufacturing will be manufacturing, and then there'll be distribution. I mean, so the economic cycle is there. Money is moving, but then when you give it to like certain big institutions and they're sitting on a pile of cash, and then the unemployed remain unemployed, I mean, I think that's what the people are seeing today.
Yeah, well, this plan led to the Social Security system in a lot of ways.
Right.
I don't know that. I mean, I think if the government had have not made so many changes and created so
Right.
much money, we wouldn't have had this.
Right.
And these bailouts and things like that, and lunch wars we couldn't afford, and looked at their balance sheet and lived within it much better.
Right.
We wouldn't have had this type incredible impact on the economy,
Right.
negative impact. that
Well,
we
okay,
have.
well, let's talk about inflation, okay? I mean, here we are. We are seeing major increases in prices, okay? So when we're talking about the unemployed,
Right.
I mean, really struggling to make ends meet and to try for that coveted job,
Right.
and suddenly the price of goods are going up, that really hits them twice as hard, don't you think?
Right.
But could you explain why is there inflation? I mean, the people do not have the money, and I think pretty much we can say that we are convinced that the monies are in some kind of storage somewhere. But then we have the people who are trying to deal with inflation, increase in prices. What happens there?
Well, inflation is made in Washington.
Right.
Because they create money.
Right.
And
so they're printing money.
They're printing money.
Right.
And we might go back to a great conservative economist, Milton Friedman, who actually died in San Francisco, lived his last day. Milton Friedman said you should get rid of the Federal Reserve and the printing machines and have a PC sitting on the desk, creating 3%, an increase of 3% in the money supply each year in and year out. So people had expectations that was suddenly not disrupted by sudden spurts in Fed policy and things like that, and which causes anxiety and people to second guessing the market. So the Federal Reserve Bank is responsible.
So are we going to your explanation of to the whys?
Did you want to have a look at that little diagram?
Yeah, I mean you've been explaining to me like why is all this happening?
Well, just go down to the last 2 bullet points. If you take sort of all the prices in the economy and all the quantity of goods and services produced and you multiply them together, you get gross domestic product, right?
Right.
That's simply what it is. And if you take the amount of money in circulation and you multiply it times the times money changes hands in a year, I'm talking about a year period or some set period, you get gross domestic product. So if you say the price of goods times the quantity of goods equals the quantity of money times the number of times changes hands.
Right.
So if there's a change in the price of goods, if there's a change in, let's go back, if there's a change in the, how do I turn this off?
This is a live show, ladies and gentlemen.
Sorry about that. Let me get back. So if the quantity of goods, probably the quantity of goods only changes by about 3% a year, increases.
Right, yeah.
I mean, change being an increase, the marginal amount, not the total. So you add to your original stock of goods and services by about 3%, approximately, historically. So if you want to keep price, and you assume that money, most neoclassical economists believe that the times money changes hands each year doesn't increase or decrease very much. It has variations, but it tends to be constant. So simply put, if you increase the money at greater than the amount of goods and services produced in a year, you have inflation, and that's what we've had. And now we're seeing that the Fed has been pumping all this money into the monetary system, and we've avoided some inflation for 2 reasons. One, the banks have not been able to lend it out, so the normal way money is created. I don't know how to turn this off.
Just keep on talking about it. This is the live show, ladies and gentlemen.
Excuse me about that. Well, the money has been created in abundance by the Federal Reserve Bank, but it hasn't got out into circulation because we have fractional reserve banking in the United States, and the banks have been, given what happened to them in 2008, they don't lend as much. They're scared. They've had a lot of defaults of subprimes.
Well, what are they doing with all the monies?
Well,
they're sitting on them.
Yes, but money, first of all, the Federal Reserve loan creates money, and then the banks add to their reserves. So for every, say, $1 a bank has in reserves, it can loan out $5.
Right.
That's called fractional reserve banking. In the system is called fractional reserve banking, or it's called the money multiplier. But that money multiplier has not expanded because of the recent experience with the financial markets, because the banks have been more cautious in lending and people just are not creditworthy enough to borrow.
Well, but that's because they don't have jobs. Of course they're not creditworthy.
Well, it's a combination, yeah, and it goes back to what the situation that was created by the shenanigans with the subprimes and all those portfolios that were just based on basically nothing. Right.
Okay, Brian, you have this chart where you're talking about how did we get into this mess? I'm not sure if we really need to talk about that. I think pretty much people are tired of politicians saying, how did we get into this mess?
I think they know, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, but I did it because it was a continuation.
Right.
My apologies to everyone for the telephone.
Don't worry about it. I mean, it's that's how we
are.
It's a live
television.
show after all. Okay, so then so what are we looking at in 2012? Really? I mean, okay, we said that.
Well, look at all the uncertainty we have, Myrna, for 2012. We have an election year, and
Right.
we have three very different type philosophies emerging.
Right.
We have the Republican philosophy, the normal, or I don't know what's normal, but then you have Ron Paul, who's a libertarian, von Mises, and then you have Obama, who is more of a Keynesian, semi-monetarist. I mean, and who will win? And there will be fundamental changes if the administration that's currently in loses. There will certainly be fundamental changes if Ron Paul wins.
Right.
And the Republicans will make
I'm sorry, I don't think he will win. not that we are saying who will win or not. Anyway, as 22 minutes goes so fast. So this particular segment is coming into an end. So for our interview with Brian, we will do a next segment so we can continue our discussion about the economy. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Myrna Lim. Thank you so much for joining us in the segment. Good night.